Hello, everyone, and welcome to part 2 of Ancient Messages in Stone Decoding the Assyrian Tree of Life. In this multi part video series, we will unveil, reveal, and decode the underlying, hidden, and multi layered messages contained in stone. Throughout the video series, I will refer to the stone tablet that you see before you as the Assyrian Tree of Life. However, it is also known in its reference as the Mesopotamian Tree of Life or the Babylonian Tree of Life, for which all three terms are interchangeable and correct. For this particular tablet has its origin of creation in an area of the world or region of the world that was known as ancient Mesopotamia. So at this time, I would like to give you all a little background and a little history about ancient Mesopotamia so that you will have an idea of the area of the world in which we are speaking of. Mesopotamia, the name means land between rivers or land of rivers, and is a name for the area of the Tigris-Euphrates river system. In modern days, it roughly corresponds to most of Iraq plus Kuwait, the eastern parts of Syria, southeastern Turkey, and regions along the Turkish-Syrian and Iran-Iraq borders. Widely considered to be one of the cradles of civilization by the Western world, Bronze Age Mesopotamia included Sumer and the Akkadian, Babylonian, and Assyrian empires, all native to the territory of modern-day Iraq. In the Iron Age, it was controlled by the Neo-Assyrian and Neo-Babylonian empires. The Sumerians and Akkadians, including Assyrians and Babylonians, dominated Mesopotamia from the beginning of written history, circa 3100 BC, to the fall of Babylon in 539 BC, when it was conquered by the Achaemenid Empire. It fell to Alexander the Great in 332 BC, and after his death, it became part of the Greek Seleucid Empire. Mesopotamia is the site of the earliest developments of the Neolithic Revolution from around 10,000 BC. It has been identified as having inspired some of the most important developments in human history, including the invention of the wheel, the planting of the first cereal crops, and the development of cursive script, mathematics, astronomy, and agriculture. So now you have some information about the history of ancient Mesopotamia, in addition to its location, area, and general region of the world in which it was located. Before we move forward, and with regard to ancient history, ancient civilizations, and ancient cultures, I would just like to say that it is amazing to me the wealth of knowledge that can be encoded in stone. In my study, I have a particular interest in the study of cuneiform writing, hieroglyphs, and petroglyphs, such as the one that you see here. A petroglyph is defined as a stone or rock that has been engraved, carved, or inscribed with raised images and forms. The particular petroglyph that you see here contains a wealth of knowledge. The amount of information contained within just this one stone tablet is incredible, and it really can be equated to being a book in stone. In having decoded the overall message that is contained within just this one petroglyph, I would estimate that the volume of its encoded information is equivalent to a 500 to 600 page textbook to include footnotes and diagrams of illustration. At this time, I'd like to give viewers a brief background as to how my having decoded this stone tablet came about. It was on a day in the month of November 2016 that I had arrived back at home after spending time at the library conducting research. Although I was familiar with this ancient petroglyph, it was not a part of my focus at that time, as I had been working on other projects related to ancient history. Having no intention of working with this stone tablet, it just so happened that I was sitting in the living room on my couch, sorting through the information that I had obtained from the library, when literally, and all of a sudden, I was impressioned or infused with knowledge as it relates to this particular piece of rock art. What stood out to me as I began working to decode the tablet was that I found myself applying various concepts that I had been learning about over the course of several years leading up to that particular day in November when I had arrived back at home from the library. After about 5 to 6 months of working to interpret and decipher the messages contained within the stone tablet, I became very concerned for the world, the state of the world, and where the world appears to be headed. As I continued to study and work with the petroglyph, it soon became apparent to me that the artisans, the sculptors, or the masons who were responsible for inscribing, carving, and engraving this tablet with such skill and precision encoded it with deliberate intention. Additionally, it appears that the multi-layered messages contained within this ancient petroglyph were meant only to be understood, revealed, and decoded in the current day and time of our modern era. In other words, it appears that the overall message contained within the tablet was not meant to be understood or revealed prior to the time in which we currently live. So, having given viewers a brief history of how I came to decode this ancient petroglyph, I would now like to point out something with regard to perspective. The majority of people viewing a stone tablet such as this one in a museum would look upon the tablet with an appreciation for the skill and the artistry with which it was created. However, most of those people would only be looking at the stone tablet from a superficial perspective, meaning that they would only be looking at its surface of raised images and not see any real meaning beyond seeing 4 men having been carved in the stone, and that those 4 men happen to be standing on either side of a tree, and that above the tree is a carving of a man seated inside of what looks to be a winged bird. However, many of us who are familiar with ancient artifacts of antiquity know and refer to this symbol as a winged sun god. Other than that, most people would simply dismiss the stone tablet, not knowing that its stone carving of raised images was conveying a very important message. So with that said, let us now move forward with the presentation. I'm quite confident that by the end of this multi-part video series, many of you might have some concerns of your own about the overall message that is being conveyed in stone. Let's begin. Something is wrong. Something is wrong with the world. Something is wrong in the world. We have not been told the whole truth about the history of human origins on this planet. As we move forward in this presentation, I will take the time to define certain terms in order to broaden your understanding and to deepen your understanding of the information that you see here contained within this petroglyph. So as I have already stated, I refer to this petroglyph as the Assyrian Tree of Life. It can also be referred to as the Mesopotamian Tree of Life or the Babylonian Tree of Life. However you refer to it, just understand that central to this petroglyph is the Tree of Life. Now, when you take in the whole of this stone tablet, from side to side and from top to bottom, the entire surface area is referred to as the field, and that field can be further defined as the whole, the all, or the oneness. So at this time, I'm going to define what the term field means as it relates to this petroglyph. So for our purposes, the field, which represents the whole, the all, and the oneness, is defined as the extent, scope, expanse, or size of an area. It also refers to the breadth, compass, distance, stretch, or width of same. This includes the space, sphere, or stretch of the space being defined. Interchangeable terms of reference for the field of the whole, the all, and the oneness are the garden of good and evil, the vineyard, the floral meadow of the valley, the orchard, the valley landscape of the soul, the mind field, and the world within a world within a world. Within the field of the whole, the all, and the oneness, we can define a specific area. At this time, I would like to give you the definition of area and what it means. Area is defined as any particular extent, range, or scope of space or surface. It is a section, portion, or part reserved for a specific function. It is the extent of a two-dimensional surface enclosed within a specified boundary or geometric figure. Area is the two-dimensional extent of the surface of a solid or of some part thereof. For example, one bounded by a closed curve, as in the area of a sphere. And finally, area can be defined as the extent of a surface or plane as measured in square units. So, as it relates to this particular petroglyph and defining a specific area within its field, what we're going to do is to place a bracket in the upper left area of the field, as you see here. We'll place our second bracket in the upper right area of the field, and then we'll move forward and move down and place our third bracket within the field. And then finally, we will round out and define this area with a fourth bracket in the field. These four brackets within the field is defined as the four corners of the universe. And ultimately, we have established what is referred to as the perimeter for the field of territorial boundary. So now, let's look at the component design and creation as it relates to the tree of life. The first element that we'll refer to is the root. The second element or component is referred to as the central axis of conjunction, or the inner core. It is the branching fork of minor conjunction upon the tree of life. The third element or component is referred to as the major axis of conjunction, or the outer core. The fourth element or component is referred to as the flower of life, or the central floral bud. The fifth element or component is referred to as the halo, or the crest, which surrounds the central floral bud and the flower of life. The sixth element or component is referred to as the central column, trunk, or stalk of the pole ground. Previously, when I had defined the word field, I had stated that there were interchangeable terms of reference for the field of the whole, the all, and the oneness. And some of those terms were the vineyard and the floral meadow of the valley. So when we look at the tree of life, indeed, we can see the vine and a tree branching vine of floral buds, so that on either side of the central column, we can see a branching of this vine that extends from the root upward and over and across the halo, or the crest, upon the tree of life. Looking at the central column of the pole ground, it would appear to divide the tree of life into two distinct halves, two distinct parts, or two areas of division within the field. This division of the tree of life is referred to as the divine tree branching of duality. At this time, I would like to give you the definition of the word divine. The divine meaning of or relating to a God, especially the supreme being, addressed, appropriated, or devoted to God or a God. It also means that which is associated with the religious, considered sacred, and proceeding forth from God or a God. It further means divine law, order, and guidance as laid forth by the supreme deity of God. It is the anointed, all-seeing, all-knowing, almighty God of omnipotence, omnipresence, and omniscience. And finally, the word divine can be defined as spiritual, hallowed, heavenly, and boundless. As you can see, I have separated out the word divine, and I have been able to extract two additional words from out of its base word. So the first two letters in the word divine, D and I, form the word die, and then we have the word vine. And at this time, I'm going to define what die and vine mean. So die means a tone in the ascending chromatic scale between do and re. It is a prefix meaning two, twice, double, or half. And indeed, we just spoke about the divine tree branching of duality, in which the central column of the pole ground appears to divide the tree of life into two halves or two major parts of division. And then for the word vine, it can be defined as any plant having long, slender stems that trails, creeps, climbs, or winds itself about a support, likened unto creeping vine stems who feature leaves and floral buds that blossom or bloom in their season. So when we look at the central column of the pole ground, indeed we do see the vine that extends itself on either side of it, beginning with the root and up unto the halo or the crest surrounding the central floral bud. And we can see that the extensions of this vine appear to have floral buds that are in blossom or that are in bloom. So within its area of territorial incorporation, we have defined the major components and elements that comprise the tree of life. We are now going to talk about the divining of the tree of life and its major areas of division within the field. Understand that the act of divining the tree of life is directly related to the act of dividing the tree of life, and that this division of separation is for the purpose of classifying or categorizing four major areas of branching. If we look at the word divine and recall its definition, we can further extract the word divide from out of it. Notice that the two words are similar in their spelling, and that the only difference between them is one letter that occurs in their spelling, as you can replace either the N or the letter D to arrive at one word or the other. With that said, I would like to read the definition of the word divide and the word division. Divide or division is defined as the act of separating into parts, groups, sections, etc., to separate, part, sunder, disconnect, or cut off from something else, to apportion or deal out in parts, distribute in shares, to sort, arrange, classify, or put in order. Similarly, as we did with the word divine, we separated out two portions of the word. And when we did so, the first two letters of the word divine, DI, and then the word vine were defined separately. So similarly, we will do that with the word divide or division. And so previously, we defined the letters DI as the word die, and it was defined as a tone in the ascending chromatic scale between do and re. It is a prefix meaning two, twice, double, or half. We can define the word vision in the word division, and the word division or the word vision is defined as the act or power of sensing with the eyes or sight with the perception of insight, inward sight, and discernment. As I indicated earlier, if you look at the tree of life, its creeping vine of floral buds presents with two major areas of division, both to the right and the left, along the central column of the pole ground, as in a tree branching of duality. So, in the further division of the tree of life, we can separate, classify, and define two additional areas of branching. In so doing, we are breaking it down by apportioning or grouping the tree of life into two additional parts. We can divide the upper portion of the tree and define it as the upper branch. We can divide the lower portion of the tree and define it as the lower branch. In its tree branching of duality, we can divide the right portion of the tree and define it as the right branch. And finally, we can divide the left portion of tree branching duality and define it as the left branch. Let's now move forward and combine the four frames in their branches of division. In its tree branching of duality, we can divide the right portion of the tree and define it as the right branch. We can divide the left portion of tree branching duality and define it as the left branch. We can divide the upper portion of the tree and define it as the upper branch. We can divide the lower portion of the tree and define it as the lower branch. As you can see, each frame that defines a designated branch of division upon the tree of life results in an interlocking frame of unified interface that is referred to as the divine framework of field incorporation. As we move forward into the following section, you will notice that dividing the field of the whole is very similar to the process for dividing the tree of life and dividing its specific areas of tree branching into their separate groupings. Keep in mind that the process of dividing the tree of life into separate and very distinct divisions is specific only to the tree of life itself, and that the process of dividing the field of the whole is specific to the area or space which surrounds the tree of life within its field of incorporation, which is defined by the four corners of the universe and its perimeter for the field of territorial boundary. So let's quickly review what we've already learned. When we look at the entire surface area of this particular petroglyph, from top to bottom and from side to side, we can refer to that as the field, and that field is known as the whole, the all, or the oneness. Within this field, we can designate a specific area, and that area can be defined by four separate brackets. We have an upper left bracket, an upper right bracket, a lower right bracket, and a lower left bracket. These four brackets come together and define and are known as the four corners of the universe. And the four corners of the universe and the space or the area that is designated within it is known as the perimeter for the field of territorial boundary. In dividing the field of the whole, we can divide the designated area or space within the field of territorial boundary and define these major parts of division in the apportionment of their groupings. We can divide the upper area of the designated space and define it as the upper field or the northern hemisphere. This is also referred to as the outfield. We can divide the lower area of the designated space and define it as the lower field or the southern hemisphere. This is referred to as the infield. We can also divide the right area of the designated space and define it as the right field or the eastern hemisphere or the right hemisphere. And finally, we can divide the left area of the designated space and define it as the left field or the western hemisphere, also known as the left hemisphere. So now that we have identified and defined the four major areas of tree branching division, which include the right branch, the left branch, the upper branch, and the lower branch, as well as the four major areas of field division within the field of territorial boundary, which include the right field, the eastern hemisphere, and the right hemisphere, the left field, the western hemisphere, and the left hemisphere, the upper field, the outfield, and the northern hemisphere, the lower field, the infield, and the southern hemisphere, I would like to talk about frames of reference and frames of context. Up to this point in the presentation, we have been working with three examples of frames. The first frame of reference is the presentation of the stone tablet itself, with the word frame being defined as the established border or structure which encloses, designates, and defines its entire surface area from top to bottom and from side to side as in an all-inclusive or all-encompassing fabric. In other words, this particular petroglyph is established in its frame of context as the universal foundation, and in its frame of reference, it is referred to as the field of the whole, the all, and the oneness. Within the field, the four corners of the universe is established as the second frame of context, and in its frame of reference, it is referred to as the perimeter for the field of territorial boundary. The word frame in this context is defined as the rigid outline or perimeter of its structure, which establishes the formation of a firm, defined boundary. The series of forms used within the field of territorial boundary to define, designate, and separate into parts the four major areas of division are also demonstrated examples of the term frame. The word frame in this context is defined as a structure formed of relatively slender pieces that are joined in such a way so as to surround and define a sizable or empty space of measure, wherein the enclosing lines of slender pieces combine to form a square or rectangle-like structure similar to that of a box, which ultimately results in the architecture or scaffolding of a structural support system. So now that we have some insight into the definition of the word frame. What would this branching and division look like from the perspective of a unified whole? Well, within the field of territorial boundary, we can place the frame for the upper field in its position. We can also place the frame for the lower field into its position. Likewise, we can go ahead and place the frames for both the right and the left field within their designated positions. Notice that in placing and positioning the four divisional frames within the field, there is the formation of a grid-like structure within the central area of their combined grouping. The two vertical lines bridging the frames for both the right and the left fields are defined as the north-south connectors, and the two horizontal lines bridging the frames for both the upper and lower fields are defined as the east-west connectors. The insertion of these directional connectors completes and closes the circuitry of divisional frames within the field and forms a bridge of connection for the central axis of minor conjunction. This panel or circuit board of directional coordinate were configured in its creation as the gatekeeper for the inner core of the tree of life. Having combined the four major areas of division in this way, we have created a network of interlocking frames whose unified interface of division defines the incorporated fields of division, and it is the resulting matrix for this grid of interconnected frames that is referred to as the divine framework of field division. Well, that's it for this video. Please be sure to like, share, subscribe, and don't forget to hit the notification bell to be notified when we post new videos. Until next time.